Caitlyn's first chapter in A Game of Thrones, the second chapter of the first novel of A Song of Ice and Fire, takes us into Winterfell's Godswood. She goes to see Ned at the giant heart tree, where we are told is the place where the Lord of Winterfell always goes once he has had to dispense justice and take a man's life. And it is here that she tells Eddard of Jon Arryn's death, and of the upcoming visit of his king and closest friend, Robert Baratheon. This sets in motion a series of events which will see the entire Stark family leave Winterfell by the end of the second novel, A Clash of Kings, and so leave the ancient castle without a Stark present for apparently the first time in its existence. By the fourth chapter in A Game of Thrones, our first experience of Eddard Stark's point of view takes the reader down into Winterfell's crypts, where Eddard takes Robert to pay his respects to the statue of his dead sister, Lyanna, and where Eddard eventually receives summons to be the Hand of the King. Ned's reaction is strange and rather muted. He knows his place is at Winterfell, and he can't help but look at the faces of the stone statues, ponder the spirits trapped within, and feel the eyes of his forefathers watching him and judging. This introduction to the Winterfell castle, entering into the Godswood and then going down into the crypts, recalls the castle's ancient origins. Winterfell begins at its heart tree and then goes deep into the earth, where there are secrets relating to its origin and to the history of Westeros as we know it. And these Starks, the old kings of winter, are put to rest where their memory can live on, and where their blood and bones help nourish the castle as we see it today, and keep the older way alive. Because this is where winter fell, thousands of years ago, when the long night ravaged Westeros. In the first video of this series, we looked at how the very first chapter of A Song of Ice and Fire, the original inspiration that George R. R. Martin had for the books, was introducing the idea of messages being sent to our main characters. We see through the eyes of Bran, who watches the ancient custom of the Stark family dispensing justice, and who witnesses his half-brother, Jon, intervene as 5 direwolf pups are about to be put to the sword, only for Jon to then find his own direwolf, Ghost, who as an albino shares the same colours as the ancient weirwood trees, these trees being the beating heart of the North, which has surely sent these direwolves to the Stark children as a way to warn of future events. What they are warning of is the same mantra that we hear in the words of House Stark, that after centuries of relative peace, winter is finally coming. And this is the same winter that arrived 8,000 years ago, centuries after the Pact of the Godseye that secured peace between the First Men and the Children of the Forest, and that gave rise to House Stark and what would become known as the Older Way. That the Stark family originated at around the same time as the Long Night's descent on Westeros makes it almost certain that these future Kings of Winter have a historical connection to the threat in the north. Their founder, Bran the Builder, would then raise 2 structures with seemingly magical properties, where the combination of the magic of the old gods and the presence of a Stark family member would be enough to keep the others at bay in the lands of Always Winter. What this magic is has never been explained, but we have enough clues in the text to know that it involves the blood of the First Men, the weirwood trees, and in Winterfell's case, the bones of the Stark family. Winterfell is more than just the seat of power in the north. It is an ancient emblem of the cultures of Westeros, where the indigenous children of the forest saw their gods and their way of life join with that of the First Men. It is from where the Kings of Winter ruled following the Andal invasion, until the Dragonlords took the north to be part of their domain centuries later. It is where, even at the time of the book series, the families of the north still congregate to in winter, when the conditions become desperate, and where a culture of respect, honour and hospitality can always be upheld. And, as it is repeatedly stated in the novels, Winterfell is where there must always be a member of House Stark present, for what reason we as readers have not yet learned. It is also where George R. R. Martin set the vast majority of the opening chapters of A Game of Thrones. It is where the story begins, and where the building blocks of its world are put in place. As early as the second chapter, when we are introduced to the Winterfell Godswood, we are also made aware of the legend of Brandon the Builder, the fabled architect of Winterfell, the Wall, and other ancient structures dotted around Westeros. We see, through the perspective of Catelyn Stark, the faces in Winterfell's heart tree, carved by the children of the forest before the first men came. And through her outsider's perspective, we get an idea of how different the Northerners are from the rest of the kingdom, by way of their ancient customs. Winterfell, more than any other castle in Westeros, is very much a living and breathing organism all of its own. It is not just a massive stone structure, housing one of the most ancient families in Westeros. It has very much been given its own character and even sentience by the author. In the world of Ice and Fire, we learn that the castle is unique in that the land was not levelled prior to building, and its sprawling size suggests that it was expanded over the years from its original First Men ring fort structure, with new buildings being raised over the centuries. It is described during Bran's second chapter in A Game of Thrones as a monstrous stone tree, with roots that go deep into the earth. And these roots are the foundations of the castle, the original structure built thousands of years ago, deep into the ground underneath the Winterfell heart tree. Because underneath this heart tree was where Brandon the Builder laid the first stones of the Stark stronghold. And what he built was a labyrinth of stone caves underneath the Godswood that laid to rest the bones of the founding members of House Stark, and left plenty of space for all of the Starks to come. Something happened in this Godswood, possibly before this very tree, that gave purpose to the building of what became Winterfell. The First Men were a plain-speaking people, and so in naming the Stark stronghold after the fall of winter, this presumably means either the coming of winter or the defeat of the others, with the heart tree of Winterfell being the place where they will have occurred. This is what Winterfell was upon conception. Not at all a castle, but more a shrine to the older way. That it was built underneath the great heart tree was a clear honouring of the old gods, and so its structure was heavily influenced by the dwellings of the children of the forest. We see from the Bran chapters in A Dance with Dragons that Bloodraven's cave is very similar in appearance. A dark network of caves where the bones of all who have gone before rest on the floor. And this eventually leads to Bloodraven's Greenseer throne, where his body has merged with the roots of the weirwoods, and where he can keep watch on the Westeros of the past, present, and even future from the eyes of the trees. From here, he can influence events and send messages, especially, it seems, to the members of House Stark. This calls back to the time just before the Long Night, when the children of the forest and the First Men were involved in a centuries-long conflict, and when the God's Eye Pact saw an intermingling of these cultures. And this would have been a huge cultural shift in Westeros. The giants and the children were the only two indigenous peoples, and the First Men represented something of a compromise between the two of them. A race who were big, strong, and who had wits and intelligence. Given how the warring between these two sides had been going, there was no real reason for the First Men to cede their clear advantage in this conflict, unless they were getting something out of it. And what they got was the older way, the original culture of Westeros. And with the power and magic of the old gods, they turned Westeros into a land that balanced old magic with a growing civilization to hugely expand the population. The Andals brought advanced technology, and of course the Valyrians brought their dragons, but the culture of Westeros was mostly built off of this pact between the First Men and the children. And in the north, it is there still. The magic of the children of the forest and the weirwoods very much still exists, even if the rest of Westeros has largely forgotten it. The Maesters, who originate from the cultures of Old Andalos, are seen to pour scorn over the tales told of this magic, because it is not something explainable or even logical. The Maesters represent the fickleness, complacency, and even arrogance of the world of Westeros at the time the story begins, a time of the longest summer on record, when it is hard to imagine the hardships of winter. It is there for the reader to see when Robert Baratheon describes the abundance and wealth of King's Landing in Ned's first chapter, and in the judgment Ned feels from the eyes watching him. But we know that magic is a real thing in Westeros, and something that makes the old gods much less a religious deity, and much more a real, tangible presence that has been largely forgotten. And this is why the Starks of Winterfell are so important, because they remember. And part of what ties them to the past are the structures that were built to keep this memory alive. In A Dance with Dragons, we see what has become of Winterfell in the time since the last Starks left it. The fact that it was left as a smoking ruin was of no real consequence, but the godswood being described as cold and lifeless in Theon's Prince of Winterfell chapter shows that the castle knows it has been left without a Stark in its vicinity, and it is clearly reacting to this. When winter falls during these chapters, it seems to live up to the extreme conditions described in Old Nan's story when the others first came. The winds of winter are about to arrive, and so Winterfell is trapped in a kind of purgatory between life and death. Meanwhile, deep below the godswood, we are repeatedly given the impression of a very real presence, watching events and judging. The names on the tombs in the crypts may be long dead, but their spirits remain. With winter now about to arrive, it could be that they will have a larger role to play in the story than the silent, spooky presence we've seen so far. The crypts of Winterfell are a relic of the past, and the Starks show that their strength and power come from how they honour and remember their dead. In the story, the crypts are there for this reason, so that the Starks have somewhere to visit where they are surrounded by winter and the darkness of what came before them. These old kings of winter have been left in the darkness but are not forgotten. In fact, their presence nourishes the Stark family and the castle itself. The crypts are shown to mirror the ancient cave of Bloodraven, complete with the bones that we can see on the floor where Bran finds him. And it is here where Bran receives this advice. Never fear the darkness, Bran. The Lord's words were accompanied by a faint rustling of wood and leaf, a slight twisting of his head. The strongest trees are rooted in the dark places of the earth. Darkness will be your cloak, your shield, your mother's milk. Darkness will make you strong. Apart from the fact that the word Stark literally means strong in German, the impression that you get with this family, and of the North in general, is that these people are more hardy and more resilient than their southern neighbours because of what they have had to endure. And this is not just because of the harsh winters and brutal First Men culture. It is because they are rooted in the darkness of the earth, the darkness of the past. This darkness is not seen in the terms dictated by someone like Melisandre of Asshai, whereby the dark is something to be feared and avoided at all costs. The Starks know, in their bones, that winter and the darkness that comes with it are inevitable, and this is their great strength. Whatever is inside these crypts, and whatever runs through the weirwoods throughout Westeros, are the very things that make the Starks the protagonists and almost certainly the saviours of this series. The white and red of the weirwoods are present in much of George R. R. Martin's imagery throughout this series. The red we know to represent blood, the life force that goes into the trees once a human life has passed. And so the white could represent the bones of the dead, within which the essence of the human body remains present and is stored forever. Together, the blood and bone that power these weirwood trees are manifest as a sea of memories, a collective consciousness that recalls times past, and can be accessed by the green seers connected to the trees. In this way, they represent the soul of Westeros. The trees are where people go when their mortal span has ended, and where they live on in the memories of others. It is the closest that George R. R. Martin comes to a belief in an afterlife. And so while the blood seems to flow through the roots of these trees, nourished by the sacrifices of the first men, the bones are perhaps where the souls of those who have passed are stored forever. And in Winterfell, they are stored in the crypts that hold the ancient Stark kings of winter. And we know that these Stark bones are of immense importance to Winterfell. In the first novel alone, we learn of how Ned made sure to have Lyanna's body returned to the north from Dorne after her death, and he even extends the same reverence to Sansa's direwolf lady when she is unfairly sacrificed early in the novel. When Eddard himself is executed at King's Landing, the story of how his bones are returning to Winterfell is an interesting subplot that recurs throughout the series. During Theon's Turncloak chapter in A Dance with Dragons, we learn of how Barbary Dustin is keeping a close eye on if, or when, Eddard Stark's bones ever cross the neck into the north. She assures Theon that they will never reach Winterfell. This must have some significance to the story beyond the grudge that Dustin bears against the Starks. These bones must store something that will make Eddard live on, if only in spirit, and so returning him to the crypts is a way of returning him to the place where he always sought solace when he was alive, the Winterfell godswood. The blood and bones of the old Stark kings give Winterfell its sentience and its power. The deepest, darkest parts of these crypts could contain something that links directly back to the first long night, and perhaps whatever this is will be what is governing Winterfell's behaviour as we head into the winds of winter. A cold, dark night has already descended upon the castle, and it seems like it is preparing for the threat from the north. Dark versus light is one of the many interesting dualities in this series. The dark is where the secrets of the past hide, and so to let them in you must reject the light of the conscious world, of summer, and of the warmth of the present. You must essentially forget what it is to be present and alive, and to consume yourself in the cold, dead darkness of the past. And if the conscious self does not do this, then the unconscious world is where fear resides, where the uncomfortable secrets of the past are buried. And it is where winter lives. From what we know of the others, this is their fixed state, their reason for being. They are what is forgotten, the reckoning that Westeros is now due following a summer where any lingering sense of caution has been sapped from those living in the present. They are the shadow of humanity that we refuse to recognize as our own. They are death, and they are coming for all that is alive. The whites in the coming of winter can be seen as the collective unconsciousness of Westeros. The Starks, the one great family in Westeros that are shown to inhabit and remember their dead, are positioned in a place where you can visit this unconsciousness, where summer's folly is rarely in evidence and always warned against, and where winter is always coming. When George R. R. Martin was first inspired to write the chapter of Bran finding direwolf pups in the summer snows, he is careful to point out that the snow in summer was a pivotal detail. It speaks to a balance of warm and cold weather, of good times rooted in hard truths, of hope balanced with fear. This is what the Starks are, and so whilst in the south we see all the fun and folly of the human spirit, the north is a reminder of man's vulnerability to the certainty there is death. It is a reckoning with the soul. In my previous video, we saw how Martin has already written of a collective consciousness in many of his previous novellas, most notably in A Song for Lyre and in 7 Times Never Kill Man. This is where memories are stored, and from where a magical force is powered that seems to influence or animate humans in some way. It is almost certainly Martin's stand-in for the human soul. In A Song of Ice and Fire, the weirwoods represent the soul of Westeros, and they have been ignored and even spurned for too long. The realm is in a state of imbalance. It needs to visit its unconscious state, and this is why winter has to come, and why the others will always be there waiting to force man into staring at the darkness he ignores. Old Nan's story contains some interesting details about the others, and perhaps even their motives. They were, so the story goes, cold things, dead things, that hated iron and fire and the touch of the sun, and every creature with hot blood in its veins. This shows that the mission of the others seems to be the destruction of human life, and of the advancement it has brought into the world. Fire represents life, passion, and the spirit of the living, and most notably, the control of fire was used as a weapon against other beasts at the top of the food chain, including, of course, the children, and the fire that they saw was used to burn their woods, their homes, and their gods. Fire in this story is framed in direct contrast to the icy cold of the others. It is the spirit that animates the living, something that is worshipped by all that follow the god R'hllor, but it is a binary choice. The fires that burn in the worship of R'hllor can never go out. The darkness can never be visited. It is shown to be a weak, capricious religion, jealous of all others and scared of what can come in its absence. The Starks could represent a balance between this duality, and maybe even be the embodiment of a pact that was made between the living and the dead. If they were the heroes of the original Long Night 8,000 years ago, then they have been preparing for a return to winter since their house was formed in the Winterfell Godswood all those years ago. The bones of the Stark family, stored in the crypts, are the crucial part of this pact. They are what the Stark founder, Brandon the Builder, essentially built around when he started to conceive of what Winterfell would be. And what he then built were tombs to keep these bones safe for thousands of years, with each leader of the house commemorated with a statue, a stone direwolf, and an iron sword. The iron sword is interesting, as iron apparently came only with the Andal invasion, and could suggest a blurring of the timelines that we have for the Long Night and the time of Brandon the Builder. When Old Nan describes the others as cold things, dead things that hated iron and fire, it could add to the theory that the Andals had already started their invasion before the Long Night starts, and that perhaps the others were created out of desperation by the children as a weapon to combat man's expansion in Westeros. The forming of the others could therefore not just be a matter of survival, but a way to preserve the older way. However, in a passage later on in the same story, Old Nan does allude to the Long Night coming before the time of the Andals, and so where this hatred of iron comes from remains a mystery for now. But what the story does tell us more of is how the last hero of legend came to defeat the others. We are told how he and a dozen companions searched for the children in the hope of learning their magic. When he found them, his companions, his horse, and eventually his dog had all been slain. His sword, be it iron, bronze, or anything else, apparently froze so hard the blade snapped when he tried to use it. But whatever the children then taught him would lead him to defeat the others, and just as crucially, would result in the founding of the Night's Watch and of House Stark. So if we are to believe that the ending of the Long Night, the origins of House Stark, and the building of Winterfell and the Wall are all connected, then it would stand to reason that the last hero was this very first Stark, probably not Brandon the Builder himself, but rather the man whose legend would give the Starks their name and their status as the Kings of Winter. The 12 companions would be the ancient First Men, many of whom may have intermarried with the children of the forest following the God's Eye Pact. The dog would be a tame direwolf, another callback to the older way, that would go on to be the sigil of House Stark, and perhaps even a way for them to maintain a relationship with the children of the forest and the older way. And of course, the place where the last hero sought out the children and came upon the knowledge that would end the Long Night would then come to be the Winterfell Godswood. This would explain the building of the crypts. It would explain the direwolf as the sigil of House Stark, and why one rests atop every grave. and it gives us a hint as to what it was that eventually kept the others at bay. We have four main religions that we see in Westeros during this series. The Old Gods of the North, the Seven Gods of the Andals, R'hllor the Lord of Light, and the Drowned God of the Ironborn. Of these gods, we have proof that two have the power to manipulate the human spirit in a very real way, bring the dead back to life, bodily in the case of R'hllor, and spiritually in the case of the weirwood trees. They are representatives of the two opposing forces that power the Song of Ice and Fire, the author's two fabled sides of the human heart in conflict with itself. And what they each represent can perhaps be best understood as, on one hand, the human spirit alive and aflame, and on the other, the depths and hidden memories of the unconscious mind. They represent conscious, forthright action and slow, contemplative meditation, or to borrow from Chinese philosophy, the conjoined energy of yin and yang. This symbol is a good indicator of the balance in George R.R. Martin's worlds, where you can see a small bit of each opposing energy in the centre of the other. Light is no good without a bit of dark. A world full of order needs a bit of chaos to function and to thrive. What we now see in Westeros is a world thrown out of balance. It is unchecked human expansionism and rationality, with an ignorance of past cultures and a disrespect for the dead. Now the last Starks have left Winterfell, we have a world that forgets the coming of winter, and so what will come next is a darkness that engulfs all. It is the great other that the followers of R'hllor talk of, and it has come because Westeros has removed its ties to its soul. It has smothered its unconsciousness to the point where it no longer remembers anything outside of the present, and this balance shall be restored through the collective will of the gods. Whilst one god demands action in the form of his chosen representative in man, the gods of the trees, the spirits immortalized through blood and bone in the weirwoods, are there to remember and to guide. They have created the others to limit the follies of man and to preserve the soul of Westeros, and their time is coming. The idea of the soul being ingrained in the unconscious was something written about by Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst who also spoke of the collective unconscious. His archetypes, and what he calls instincts, are what are passed down and inherited through cultures, and they help frame an individual's conscious experience. They remain there even if you don't consciously recognize them, and they make up the soul, which Jung calls the shadow side to an individual's ego. Jung's shadow and ego bear a striking resemblance to Martin's Ice and Fire. The others were repeatedly described as shadows in the A Game of Thrones prologue, and the ego of man is there for all to see when the Baratheons and Lannisters make themselves welcome at Winterfell in the opening chapters of the novel. Whilst the followers of R'hllor devote themselves to the fire of the conscious mind's heart and spirit, the North beds itself in the icy darkness of the unconscious. And the gods of the trees are shown to connect with humans through dreams, in much the same way as Jung uses dreams as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious mind. It is where your soul tries to be heard, and so often gets ignored. The reckoning that is coming for Westeros is happening because people are unwilling to look into their own soul. The longest summer on record was Westeros celebrating the peaceful Baratheon era and turning a blind eye to the threats of winter. And now that hardship has visited the realm in the form of the War of the Five Kings, their souls have been found wanting. It is another Jungian psychoanalyst, Mary Louise von France, who puts it more eloquently. The whole collective unconscious is in upheaval. There is disharmony in the conscious behaviour of the collective, and the unconscious is brooding on destruction. These words seem like they could have come from Bloodraven himself. At the time of the first novel, Westeros is in imbalance. personified perfectly by the ruling characters of Robert Baratheon and Cersei Lannister, characters who have forgotten, or maybe even who have never known, the idea of a reckoning with the soul. By this, we mean a level of introspection, even meditation, on the effects of their actions. Both characters have no problem acting, but have an almost pathological inability to grasp the consequences of these actions until it is too late. This is the spirit acting without the soul. It is summer's folly and a refusal to acknowledge the coming of winter. And this is a perfect example of what von Franz describes as disharmony in the conscious behaviour of the collective. The whole of Westeros, apart from the north, seems to have forgotten what winter feels like, and now the others are coming, we are due to see a level of destruction that surpasses even the wars of the opening 5 novels. The only ones in a position to stop or even reason with these gods were the Starks of Winterfell, and now even they have abandoned their responsibilities, and have very probably broken a pact that was made 8,000 years ago. And so, the salvation of man could once again depend on the indigenous people of Westeros. The singers that roamed through ancient Westeros, now called the Children of the Forest, do not seem to fear death in so much as they fear their lives ending. Their time in Westeros is about to come to an end, but they will continue to exist in the trees, joining the gods that have guided their own existence. This spirit elevation from human body to immortal soul is something that recalls Greek mythology and the ever-expanding pantheon of the gods. Except in this story we do not have individual characters like Zeus, Athena, Prometheus or Dionysus. We have a collective unconsciousness that observes, that judges, and that will soon act. The children, the singers who used to walk the earth, are the real gods of Westeros. They gave themselves to the trees, and the trees gave them eternal life as long as they remain. And so, thousands of years ago, the same became true of the Starks and the other first men. When everyone from Brandon the Builder all the way through to Eddard Stark are buried in the crypts of Winterfell, they joined themselves to the old gods. When the first men made peace with the children, they were in many ways seeking redemption from the gods, whether they knew it or not. The pact that was forged joined these first men to the old gods of Westeros, but to save its soul, they would have to make peace with the others, to face the darkness in its purest form. Somehow, one man was able to do this, and so a new understanding was reached whereby a shrine to the gods was stored deep under the heart tree in the Winterfell Godswood. And in so doing, the world of Westeros can remain sustainable. In the first chapter of A Game of Thrones, we see Ned warning Bran that if you are powerful enough to have other men do your killing for you, then you will soon forget what death means. This is as good an articulation of the Starks' pact with the old gods as you are able to get. Through being at Winterfell, the Starks cannot help but know death. They are surrounded by it, nourished by it, and have made peace with it. They respect the gods, and the gods in turn watch over them. When Jon finds his direwolf pup in the first chapter, the gods are talking to him and sending him a message. They are doing this to give humanity one last chance at redemption, as a way to save the soul of Westeros that is currently being lost. Jon, as the Song of Ice and Fire, will represent this balance. On one side, buried deep in the darkness, he will find Bran, a boy who dreamed of being a knight, but is now fated to represent the yin energy of a meditative, thoughtful introspection of the soul. And on Jon's other side, representing light, could be Daenerys, a young girl who grew up in her brother's shadow, married off to forge an alliance. But like Bran, her dreams of raising a family with Drogo were shattered, and forced her to be born again in flame as pure yang energy, representing the full force of the human spirit in action. Winterfell, built just after the fall of the others, is the key to balance in the north. That there must always be a Stark in Winterfell is part of the bargain that enabled peace with the others the first time, because the Starks, via the older way, will remember the dead. And the crypts are where the spirits of the Starks are kept, where these Stone Kings still watch over the Starks, part protector, part enforcer. They are spirits that exist still through the bones of the dead and the blood of the heart trees. And when the time is right, they will rise. The others are the creation of man without spirit. They have no lifeblood, and they exist to hunt the living. They are not just ghosts or shadows, but real, reanimated memories of the living that seek vengeance when the world is out of balance, when it forgets what it was. Because this threat is one that comes from the north, and the north remembers. The gods of the north are much less the solitary, all-forgiving and jealous deities of our modern world, but much more like the ancient Greek gods who were once mortal, but who now ascended to a different consciousness in order to maintain the balance between light and dark, living and dead, fire and ice. They are the soul of Westeros that you cannot kill, no matter how hard you try. And so Westeros is heading towards another reckoning with its soul, one that it will lose unless our hero, the Song of Ice and Fire made flesh, can reconcile the imbalance between these two opposing forces, represented by Bran and Daenerys. And so the ruling power of Westeros will be sacrificed for the good of man, and the realm will return to the older way reborn, where the last Greenseer sits on a new Iron Throne, as a new pact is made with the dead, and the world changes again to see a new dawn. And this new throne may well end up being in the one place in Westeros where you can speak with the gods, and where they can be heard. Because this is where winter fell, and it will be where winter will come again.